Our Middle East editor Jeremy Bowen. Well, let's speak to Behnam Ben Taleblu, who is a senior fellow at the Foundation of Defence of Democracies, focusing on national security and foreign policy. Behnam, it's good to talk to you. Thank you for taking the time to talk to us. Let me ask you first of all, Jeremy said there in his piece that ground assaults are usually part of the pattern, if you like, of what Israel does in these circumstances. It's done it in the past. How likely do you think we're going to see a ground assault now?
Indeed, it's great to be with you. If past is any prologue here, then yes, there will be some sort of ground assault. No one wants to get out ahead of this, of course, not even the IDF, which had retracted a statement it had given to members of the foreign press just recently about a ground assault. As you know, and as the piece mentioned, there were reserves called up. There was a lot of tank armor and other sorts of activity moved towards the border. But of course, no official decision on a formal ground assault given. But I would say if past is prologue, it's likely.
Let's talk about Hamas, because we've been talking about the way that Hamas has been sending rockets into Israel. And it looks as if, doesn't it, Hamas has accumulated even more weapons over the past year. Where is it getting those weapons from? Why is that important?
It's a critical part of the equation because, as you know, Hamas is under a blockade, but Hamas receives lots of material support from the world's foremost state sponsor of terrorism, the Islamic Republic of Iran. Now, this is not to say that every munition, every rocket in the Gaza Strip comes from Iran, but both Palestinian Islamic Jihad and Hamas have received rocket technology from the Islamic Republic. And you also see that in the pace of some of the volleys. Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad are firing more rockets in greater numbers, at greater times, at greater civilian targets than ever before. And when you compare these volleys to previous rounds of escalation, 2008, 2012, 2014, you see that more has been fired in a shorter time. And the big question that military analysts are, well, there's two big questions military analysts are pondering. One is, how sustainable is this rate of fire? And two is, what is the exact nature of Iran's material support to domestic rocket production inside the Gaza Strip using domestic materials rather than trafficking materials, as Iran, of course, is employing the same strategy through Syria to bolster Lebanese Hezbollah.
Another aspect of this which differs from, as you were saying, 2014, 2008, are the mixed towns and cities within Israel. And what we've seen there is the Israeli Arabs and Israeli Jews attacking each other, you know, talk of civil war. That is a key difference, isn't it, as well, that gives this current crisis a very different feel.
Domestically, yes. You know, I'm no Israeli domestic politics expert, but it does give a very different feel. It's the largest domestic wave of violence since the Intifada back in the early 2000s. And of course, this has not fallen on deaf ears, particularly for Israel's adversaries. Hamas, of course, used the protests and used the pushback on the Temple Mount to actually begin launching these rockets. So if the crisis continues and the domestic turmoil continues, I would expect Israel's adversaries to, again, if past is prologue, to try to use these domestic cleavages as part of their public foreign policy pressure against the Jewish state.
What's the way out of this?
You know, in some ways, there is no way out but through. If the Israelis do end up going with a ground war, it'll be up to them to decide the ways, ends, and means. If they're going to go against the rocket depots, rocket facilities, or against Hamas's leadership en masse, that's a question for them to decide right now. But I think ultimately the big win will be establishing deterrence vis-a-vis Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad, and that may mean something as simple as a lull in rocket fire. It may mean something as complex as more decapitation strikes. It's really too soon to tell.
Okay, Behnam, thank you very much indeed for talking to us.
Thank you so much.